The streets of Gaza were eerily silent, the calm before a storm, or perhaps the beginning of a fragile peace. For weeks, the air had been filled with the deafening sounds of missiles and the cries of families shattered by war. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, came an announcement: a ceasefire. A word that brought both hope and skepticism. But while the world's attention turned to the war-torn streets of Gaza, another battle was brewing, far from the rubble, in the corridors of Israeli power. The ceasefire agreement was brokered by Qatar after relentless negotiations. It was supposed to be a glimmer of hope. Under the deal, hostages held by Hamas would be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners, and aid would flow into Gaza. For many, it was a moment to breathe, a rare pause in the decades-long conflict. Yet, within the Israeli cabinet, the deal ignited a firestorm. At the center of the storm stood Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's controversial Minister of National Security. A man known for his hardline stance against Hamas, Ben-Gvir was furious. To him, this wasn't a peace deal. It was a betrayal. He believed it handed Hamas a victory on a silver platter, undermining the military's hard-fought gains. His voice boomed in the cabinet meeting. This deal rewards terror and weakens Israel. But Ben-Gvir wasn't just content with voicing his dissent. He issued an ultimatum. If the ceasefire went forward, he would resign, threatening to destabilize the already fragile coalition government led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Ben-Gvir wasn't alone in his opposition. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, another staunch right-wing figure, called the deal a disaster for Israel. He pointed to the list of Palestinian prisoners set to be released, many of whom had been convicted of violent attacks. Among them was Zakaria Zubeidi, a former leader of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, jailed for his role in deadly assaults on Israelis. Smotrich questioned, "What message are we sending? That terrorism works." Despite the opposition, Netanyahu defended the ceasefire, describing it as a necessary step to secure the return of hostages and avoid international condemnation. "This is not about politics, it's about saving lives," he argued. But his words did little to soothe the growing unrest within his government. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the stakes couldn't have been higher. For months, families had endured relentless airstrikes, food shortages, and a collapsing healthcare system. Children scavenged through rubble for scraps of food. Parents watched helplessly as their malnourished children succumbed to preventable diseases. For them, the ceasefire wasn't just political, it was survival. But across the border, Israeli citizens were divided. Some supported the ceasefire, hopeful it could bring long-term stability. Others shared Ben-Gvir's fears that this deal would embolden Hamas, leading to more violence down the line. And then there was the issue of the hostages. The thought of seeing their loved ones again brought tears to the eyes of Israeli families. But the thought of releasing prisoners who had once brought devastation to their homes was a bitter pill to swallow. As the clock ticked closer to the implementation of the ceasefire, a sense of unease loomed. Ben-Gvir made good on his threat, announcing his resignation. His departure sent shockwaves through the government. Yet Netanyahu's coalition managed to survive. Barely. The political infighting revealed the cracks in Israel's leadership. Cracks that could widen at any moment. On the ground in Gaza, the first trucks carrying aid rolled in. Families rushed to receive whatever they could: a loaf of bread, clean water, a sliver of hope. But their relief was tempered by caution. Would this ceasefire last? Or was it just a temporary lull before the bombs fell again? This ceasefire is more than just a pause in fighting. It's a test of leadership, diplomacy, and trust. It's a gamble, with lives hanging in the balance. For Gaza, it's a lifeline. For Israel, it's a political minefield. And for the world, it's a reminder of how deeply intertwined hope and fear can be in the search for peace. The question now is not just whether this ceasefire will hold, but at what cost.